Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special Progressive Army event. My name is Brandon Sutton, and I will be your host for tonight for this wonderful virtual town hall with the candidate running for California's 12th congressional district, Stephen Jaffe. Say hello, Stephen.
Hello, how are you tonight?
I'm doing fine, and yourself?
Just dandy. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Oh, yes. And so, for those of you who do not know, the impetus for this discussion is that currently, right now, as we are speaking, Representative Nancy Pelosi, the current, representative of California's 12th congressional district, is having her own town hall event. So, Steve Jaffe, the man who will be primarying her this upcoming race, thought that it would be prudent to have his own little event to counter some of the things that she's saying. Isn't that right, Stephen?
That is correct. I'm interested in responding to what Ms. Pelosi may say and to what she does not have to say.
Oh, of course. I'm sure there will be a lot that goes unsaid at the CNN event, wherever it may be. As we are, as I have no clue where they are holding it, and I'm sure a lot of people feel that way. Uh, but before we get into the question, before we get into responding to something that she has been saying, why don't you tell everyone who's listening, all of our viewers, about a little bit about yourself? Who you are, how you got to this point, and where do you see yourself going in the future, politically?
Sure. My name's Stephen Jaffe. I have been a lawyer in San Francisco for a long time, 46 years. I practice employment law for plaintiffs only. That means I only represent employees. I will not represent employers. And it's a kind of civil rights law because most of it is discrimination against people in protected classes: age, race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, nationality, ethnicity, the whole list of protected classes. So that has been my law practice. In the last 4 or 5 years, I've gotten pretty deeply involved in local politics here, campaign. Last year, Bernie Sanders really inspired me, and I started to work on his national campaign. Ultimately, I was recruited by the national campaign. I went to the state of Nevada to legally oversee the Nevada caucuses, which were really chaotic, I will tell you, and continued to work with Bernie until the nomination, in my opinion, was pretty much stolen from him by the DNC. We can talk about that a little later if you wish. So we woke up on November 9th following the 2016 election. I was kind of in a state of shock, as I know that many progressives and even moderates were. And I decided to stop talking about it and really do something about it. I think Ms. Pelosi is vulnerable. I do not think she represents her own constituents here in San Francisco. I think she sees herself more of a national figure than a congressperson for her constituents here. So I filed for the office, and here we are.
Sounds great. So, right now at the CNN town hall, they started with some kind of rant about Russia, and I don't feel like that's a prudent way to go. So before we get into addressing some of her questions, some questions going to be asking, why don't you just give us sort of a brief, broad strokes? What are you campaigning on? What is your policy platform? What do you hope to accomplish if you become elected to Congress?
Well, there's not enough time to go through all of them. I'll give you the highlights. I think first and foremost, well, I would, until a week ago, I probably would have said my very first platform issue would have been healthcare. I am a very strong advocate of single-payer healthcare. I believe it is time for the United States to join the rest of the civilized provide for the universal healthcare of its residents. I think it is not only a legal issue or a political issue. I think it is a moral issue. I think we have a moral issue not to deny the best possible quality health care to every resident. In the last week or so, events have been unfolding so fast in Washington. I think that, as Mr. Clapper said, James Clapper yesterday, that Mr. Trump is attacking the very institutions of our government. And I think things have risen to the point where that also needs to be addressed. There's some talk about, I mean, the revelations of today show how very serious this is. I don't want to get to it. It is not premature to start discussing about whether or not Mr. Trump is fit to continue to serve in office. And I know somebody wants me to elaborate on that. I want to help reform the Democratic Party. I want to abolish superdelegates. I think superdelegates are undemocratic, both with a big D and a little d. They essentially say to people who vote in Democratic primaries, yes, you can go ahead and vote, but we're not going to count your vote. Your vote may not be counted. Indeed, it's so bad, Brandon, it is so bad that lawyers for the DNC in a lawsuit have told courts within the last, we're not even obligated to count votes. We can manipulate the votes in the primary system to pick who we want to be nominated. And there's nothing the courts, can do about it.
Well,
I find that outrageous, and that needs to be fixed.
Well, so I want to move a little bit, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to unpack what you said. And I do want to remind people that we're supposed to be, countering some of the questions that are being asked by Chris Cuomo during the CNN town hall. And I have someone who is supposed to be feeding me these questions, but as they've informed me, almost 10, 15 minutes into the town hall, there have been no formal questions asked, just a lot of, stuff about Russia, a lot of stuff about the possibility that Trump might have leaked classified info during a meeting with Russian delegates, or I'm sorry, Russian government officials. That's being reported by Washington Post. That may or may not be accurate. And so we're just going to keep going along this train of thought until they do start asking actual questions. So in your statement there, the first thing you said was healthcare, right? So healthcare reform is, I think, on a lot of people's minds right now, considering the fact that the House just recently passed the American Healthcare Act, in their attempt to repeal and replace Obamacare. So you support Medicare for all, right? And this puts you out of step, I would say, with a good number of people within the House the Democratic Party. Do you not see the value, or rather, do you not put as a priority first maintaining the ACA? Do you think that we have to just push for a single payer solution? Is the ACA just not good enough?
You're talking about Obamacare, the ACA.
Yeah, Obamacare.
No, I don't think it goes. I don't think it goes. I think it is well intended. I think it is better than what used to exist, but I do not think it went far enough. There are still gaps left. People who cannot, and I think fix for this is kind of like being married or pregnant. Either you are or you're not. And I think that the single payer is the only rational possible fix for the healthcare crisis we're in. So I hope that is a plain enough answer to your question. The ACA was good, but it did not go, and it doesn't. The Republicans repealed it. So the question now is, if successful in opposing this disastrous Republican plan, and if I'm in Congress, I'm pushing for single payer. I also think that there's probably more Democrats, if this Republican bill is defeated, who will see the wisdom of a single payer system and start supporting it. I believe that to be true.
Okay, let me just push back a little bit on that real quick. So a lot of your possible Democratic colleagues in the House would say that they would love to pass single payer, but there just isn't the political, that's just not politically expedient. It's not widely enough supported for that to happen. Do you agree with this position? Do you think that single payer healthcare is just not popular enough to pass?
No, I do not. I think that if single payer healthcare were explained to the Democrats and the population about what it is and what it is not, that I think it would become very popular. I know one of the big, there's two main criticisms of single payer healthcare. One is completely socialism, and the other one is everybody's taxes because the government will have to pay for more healthcare. The socialism accusation, I think, is absurd because we are all socialists. We are socialists because of Medicare. We are socialists because of Medicaid. We are socialists when we have police departments, fire departments, libraries, veterans departments, anything where money is pooled by the government for the common good. That is socialism at work. Socialism really has acquired kind of a dirty name, and the Republican opponents want to try to equate it with communism and dictatorships, which is absolutely wrong. The other argument against it is, won't this increase our taxes by some? Uh, yes, it probably will. But what they're leaving out is dropping the other shoe. It will increase the taxes, but guess what will be gone for everybody? Health insurance premiums. No one will have to pay any health insurance premiums. And I would venture to guess that the amount of tax increase would be far less than the amount of health insurance premiums that people will no longer have to pay, because those health insurance premiums are fueling a greedy for-profit health insurance industry.
Okay, so again, I promised everyone we were supposed to be taking questions, or rather responding to the questions from the Nancy Pelosi town hall. It is now 15 minutes past 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and they are still only addressing speculation on whether or not Trump revealed information to Russia government officials. So that's where we are right now. But you talked about Trump too in your first response. So you said that
Yes.
the Trump presidency is attacking some of the foundations of our government. And so can you speak a little bit more on that while we wait for them to start asking actual questions during town hall?
The actual quote was the institutions of our government, and I'm quoting the former director of national intelligence, James Clapper. I think he said that 2 days ago, and I quoted him on my Facebook page and my web page. I think he's doing that because the Constitution sets up three branches of government, and they are set up as everybody knows, a system of checks and balances, so that one cannot overwhelm the other two. And what Mr. Trump is doing is seeking to take the power from the judicial branch and the legislative branch and concentrated it in the executive branch. And that's not how the Constitution works. And that is dangerous because that leads to dictatorship. So I think that's what Mr. Clapper was talking about, specifically when he has received court rulings he doesn't like, particularly on his immigration ban. He not only has said, I disagree with the ruling, he has gone out and made personal attacks against the judges who have made the rulings against him. One judge, he attacked his Mexican heritage, even though the judge was born here, here in the United States. Another time, he attacked the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which he says I think he said the often reversed and not respected Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Those are attempts to slam and attack the judiciary itself. And that's wrong. Same thing with the Congress. He has done things which he seeks to remove power of the Congress and just sign a bunch of executive orders, which frankly really were things that the Congress should consider to have taken up. And I think the whole country is aware of all this, but it's dangerous. It's dangerous, Brandon.
No, I agree. I think that there are definitely some aspects of the Trump presidency that call into question how much power the executive branch has, right? Maybe questions that should have been asked a long time ago and that are only just being, you know, conceptualized now. The person in charge is a little bit, you know, a little bit less than competent, maybe, right? So again, folks, I apologize, although it's not my fault. We should be trying to answer questions that are coming from the Nancy Pelosi town hall, and they have finally gotten to their first question. And as we wait for it to be relayed to us, I will ask you one question about one question from Twitter, from one of your Twitter followers. Specifically, do you support a ban on fracking? Like, what is your position on fracking?
Um, you know what the two most unheard and rare words are in politics? Yes, no. And I'm going to seek to answer questions like the one you just asked me as directly as I can. The answer is yes. I support a ban on fracking. I don't think that is necessary. I'm a strong advocate of the creation of alternative sources of energy, solar, wind, tide, and I think we need to study safe nuclear energy as well. There's no reason to destroy the planet with something like fracking, offshore oil drilling, and similar kinds of activities. So the answer to your question is yes.
All right. Okay. So the first question that's being asked to Nancy Pelosi is essentially, uh, the person is saying that they have lost faith in the willingness of the Republican Congress to stand up to Trump. In this current hyperpartisan environment, our systems of checks and balances simply do not work, right? So it's some stuff that you've already talked about. So specifically,
that's what I just spoke about. Yes.
It took them 20 minutes to get to, but we got to it much faster. So if anything, we're beating them time wise. But so like let's parse out that question a little bit, right? So speaking of the Republican Party, right, there seems to be some desire amongst a lot of Democratic, public servants, for lack of a better word, a lot of in Congress and the Senate, to still work across the aisle, right? Like, how do you plan, if you make it to Congress, to work with Republicans? Like, do you plan to work with Republicans? Do you think that there should be certain concessions made to them?
That's a good question. Of course, I will always work with people. That is the nature of politics. But I will not, in doing that, compromise very strongly held positions or principles that I have. I will not sell out my own principles, and I will not sell out the principles or the beliefs of my constituents in doing so. I think it is possible by persuasion and talking together to always reach a compromise. I do litigation, and I know that 80% of cases are settled. 80% of cases are settled. The only way to do that is by compromising. And that's what I've been doing for over 4 decades. But I will not sell out my principles or those of my constituents.
Well, allow me to sort of, the question has now been clarified by the person asking, or rather it's been expounded upon a little bit more, right? So in terms of working with the Republican Party in Congress, there seems to be this focus on working with them in order to impeach Trump, right? So the person is, Trump, like they seem to be working towards impeachment, right? Not necessarily working towards functioning properly as the legislative branch, but towards impeaching Trump. So let's take it from there. What is your position on the way to handle Trump, right? Should the goal be to just impeach him and let the chips fall where they may? Should we be working toward the more long-term goal? It doesn't just put Pence in office or even Paul Ryan in office. What's the best way, according to you, to handle the Trump presidency?
Well, I think Mr. Trump is answering that question for all of us because every day that goes by, there is a new crisis and a deeper crisis than there was the day before. The last two events, the firing of Comey and now this disclosure of highly classified information, are the two worst things he's done, if he's done them. And it appears that he may have done. Well, he certainly had fired Comey, and it appears he may have disclosed classified information. Those are the two worst things. There's only one way to get rid, to constitutionally remove Mr. Trump, and that's by impeachment. But the other way that most people are not aware of, we have what's called the 25th Amendment to the Constitution. And it has to do with presidential succession. And Section 4 of the 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution provides that if the vice president and a certain number of cabinet members agree that the president is no longer capable of carrying out his powers and duties, they can go to the Congress and ask that he be either temporarily or permanently removed. And that's without the consent of the president. And the president then can make a counter argument, but the Congress, under the Section 4, can ultimately determine whether or not the president is removed or not. I have serious questions whether Mr. Trump is actually capable of carrying out the powers and duties of the presidency based upon what I've seen in the last 2 weeks. So that's something that I would like the country and the House of Representatives to pay very close attention to.
Fair enough. So, right now CNN's on a commercial break, right? So I'll ask you a follow-up question. What do we do? Say Trump is impeached tomorrow, right? Say we impeach Trump tomorrow. It's hard to believe the world would not be a better place if that were to occur. Uh, what do we do after that? Do we just allow Pence to become president? How do we continue to move forward through this? A lot of times we hear impeach Trump, and then it becomes question marks, question marks, question marks. Everything's better, right? But I think that both you and I know it's not quite that simple when it comes to the way Republicans work. So after we impeach Trump, what do we do then?
Well, let me rewind for a bit. Um, I really believe that before any movement towards impeachment occurs, we must allow the FBI and the two committees in Congress, the House and the Senate, to complete their investigation of how closely and to what extent he and his people were connected with Russia. Because once we know how deep that goes, we don't know whether it's just Mr. Trump. We don't know whether the vice president is implicated in that. We don't know how far down the line of succession the investigation may lead. And it is only after knowing that we can talk about a proper way to nation. If we impeach Donald Trump and we replace him with Pence, and it turns out a month or two later that Pence was somehow caught up in this, what are we going to do? Have another impeachment? That's just a not good way to do it. So before we act, we must have all of the information in hand, and then we proceed with whatever needs to be done to fix this horrible situation.
Are you in favor of appointing a special prosecutor investigator to the case?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So right now we are still waiting for the return from commercial breaks at CNN. We don't have commercials here, so I guess I'll make a quick plug. You are watching a special virtual town hall with the Progressive Army. My name is Brandon Sutton. I am the host of The Discourse as well as a writer for the progressivearmy.com. It is only because of independent media like this that you are able to watch such glorious it's only because of net neutrality, really, that you're able to watch such glorious content. But it's only because of viewers like you who support us through Patreon and other forms of donation platforms that we are allowed to do this, which is a shameless plug for the Patreon at the bottom of the screen. If you would, be so kind, if you find it in your heart, it's cool. Otherwise, be sure to like, subscribe and share this information. Make sure to get the word out. So apparently when they come back from break, they're going to move into healthcare. But let's take as we're waiting for that, let's take it to a different place. So we talked a bit about fracking. The Pentagon, as well as a bunch of other organizations, NOAA, NASA, etc., have framed climate change as not only an issue of national security, but also just a basic existential threat to humanity. And currently, we have people like Brett Stevens in the New York Times and in other places basically muddying the waters around whether or not climate change is actually happening, whether or not the sea levels are going to rise by 2 feet or 20 feet, which better or worse is up to you. So what is your position on climate change? You've talked very specifically about fracking. How about climate change? Where does that rank for you in terms of importance?
Well, it's very important because I think it is a symptom of a much deeper disease. People who deny climate change are science deniers. And there's an old saying, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And climate change is a fact. Science is a fact. And to deny it is like denying gravity. You can deny it all you want, but if you step off a cliff, you're still going to fall. So, and I am concerned that this science denial and climate change denial is the product of ultimately a poor and a culture in the U.S., to use a big word, anti-intellectualism, which means that people are mistrustful of smart people. People are mistrustful of scientists and university professors, and yes, even lawyers, um, people who are highly educated, and they take the position that my ignorance, I have just as much right to my ignorance as you do to your knowledge and your science. And that's very scary. That didn't used to be the case. Educated people used to be highly respected. But now, because of phenomena like homeschooling, for example, where parents who may not have been properly educated themselves are endeavoring to educate their children, they can't do it. We need people in the public schools. I'm against charter schools for several reasons. That's one of them. And I have First Amendment issues on the other issues. So I think at the core of it is we must improve our education system so people learn to respect knowledge and science and facts.
Okay, so CNN and Chris Cuomo made a liar out of me. I thought that they were going to be talking about healthcare when they came back, but apparently they're now talking about Comey's firing and timing of it all and the difference between the Democrats one supporting the firing and I yes, okay. I didn't know. I didn't realize their town hall was going to be only on Russia. So I guess I should. I guess I should ask you a question about Comey being fired, right? Okay. So the question
Uh,
they well, the question they've asked was
Go ahead.
prior to Comey's firing, prior to the election, the Democrats and Democratic Party establishment seemed to be gung ho for Comey to be fired. For what for his part in bringing Hillary Clinton's investigation to light. So, how do you feel about the firing of James Comey by President Trump last, I want to say Tuesday? If I sound a little bit iffy about it, it's because like I'm just surprised that they haven't talked about anything but Russia. So please go ahead.
Uh, I think President firing of Comey is outrageous, and I believe it's illegal. When the Democrats sought his firing prior, it was because they felt he had improperly influenced the election by coming out and talking about Hillary Clinton's emails. But that's not the reason Trump fired Comey. Trump readily admits to Lester Holt at NBC, I fired Comey because I didn't want him investigating me anymore. That's illegal. That is what us lawyers call obstruction of justice. That's like a defendant in a criminal trial stepping up in the middle of a trial and saying, I'm the prosecutor here because he's doing too good of a job. He's proving the case against me. Trump fired Comey because Comey was finding out too much about him. And that's why it's obstruction of justice.
I mean, I'm no fan of Comey, and I'm definitely no fan of Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. I mean, to push back against that, just for the sake of playing devil's advocate, I think that there is a substantial difference between saying that Comey was fired because of the investigation itself, and Trump was fired. I'm sorry, and Comey was fired because of the way the investigation was being, what's the better word? Not necessarily handled, but but the way it was being litigated in the mainstream, if that makes sense. At the same time, I agree with your, assessment that it is incredibly sketchy and incredibly problematic, and it borders on illegal depending on how you interpret certain aspects of the law. That being said, I think that, going back to what you said earlier, there needs to be a special investigator appointed who, is not able to be fired or be released by Donald J. Trump. So we don't have to have these kinds of conversations about whether or not the firing was technically illegal or just incredibly, incredibly immoral. So let's just move on a little bit. I still believe, okay, so now they're talking about North Korea. Uh, Okay, so how do you feel overall? All these questions are all really the same, right? Their questions are all foreign policy related, specifically foreign policy as it relates to this neo axis of evil but that is Russia and North Korea, and I'm assuming they're going to get to China and Syria soon. So, the broad strokes. Let's put that for right now under the umbrella of foreign policy, right? So, how do you feel about the way Trump has been handling foreign policy so far? As it comes to Syria, as it comes to North Korea, let's leave Russia a little bit to the background there. And second part of the question, how do you feel about the way the Democrats have been supporting or opposing his handling of foreign policy, at least especially as it comes to Syria, North Korea?
Well, I don't think Trump's been handling foreign policy at all. I think we're a ship without a rudder here. So I'll make that count. Um, North Korea is a messy situation. I think it is incumbent upon the President of the United States to make certain that we, the people of the United States, are safe. Um, it is not incumbent upon us to be the policeman of the world or Asia. I don't think that we need to run in every time North Korea rattles its sword. If North Korea has a missile that looks like it's going to be shooting at us and landing in San Francisco, I think the U.S. does then probably have a right to act to defend itself. The stickier problem is, what will the U.S. do if North Korea, for example, were to invade South Korea? Should we stand by or act? I don't know how many U.S. troops are in South Korea. I know it's a big number, maybe 100,000, maybe less. We obviously would have to act to extract them. Do we help to defend South Korea? Um, I'm not sure. I really have to study that a little more. We certainly don't invade North Korea. We don't invade anybody else. But we have a treaty with South Korea, which I believe that we are obliged to honor. Um, any other foreign policy questions?
Well, so I just want to reiterate the second part of my question. So we saw back, I want to say early April, when Trump, basically decided to bomb the airbase in Syria, the Assad government for the first time. We saw sort of bipartisan support of that kind of bombing. Similarly, we've seen, if not necessarily bipartisan support from people in Congress of his, military maneuvers towards North Korea. We've seen sort of like generally people, outlets on the left pushing forth this narrative that North Korea is aggressive. They're aggressive toward the United States of America. Syria is aggressive toward the United States of America. Where do you stand on that kind of position? Like, do you feel, personally, as it stands right now, that Syria and North Korea are existential threats to the United States of America? And if not,
Well, North Korea possibly, yes. Syria is a threat to the United States. There's a horrible three-sided civil war going on inside Syria, and there are atrocities being committed there. But I don't believe anything going on in Syria is a threat to the safety of the United States. North Korea may be.
Okay, so you do not believe that's the Syrian government. I asked you this question because was it? Yes, it was Marco Rubio was pushing forth this narrative a few weeks, last month, that the Assad government was an existential threat to the United States of America, sort of reiterating this kind of pre-Iraq war rhetoric that, basically pulled us into the Iraq war. So I just want to know your position on that. So again, we are waiting for them to come back from commercial. Chris Cuomo has promised again that they will be talking about healthcare when they get back. I will not hold my breath because fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Okay. So right now,
Can I make a comment about healthcare before the questions come? Speaking of,
if they come,
if they come.
I'm not so sure.
Back on March 25th, Nancy Pelosi held a town hall out here in San Francisco, and that was at Balboa High School. And at that time, she actually had to face her own constituents, the people of the 12th district, and it did not go well for her. And a couple things she said were very disturbing. The fact that she does not favor single payer. But she also said something else, and her exact words were actually, Obamacare is to the left of single payer. Now, that's a very troubling thing to hear from the minority leader of the United States House of Representatives, because it shows to me that she really doesn't understand what the issue is there. Obamacare is not to the left of single payer. It is pretty much to the right, more towards the center of the political spectrum. Is beyond me, and I would love to be able to ask her that question. So
Fair enough.
I want people to listen to what she might have to say in the context of that statement.
That's a fair point. So, as we are waiting for the healthcare question to be fed to me, we'll move to another question from your Twitter, if you don't mind. So, one of your followers wants to know, how do you feel about the legalization of cannabis? They explain that they are disabled by chronic pain, but they are afraid of taking prescription opioids because of opiates or opioids for fear of addiction. So how do you feel about, let's say prescription, medical marijuana, specifically in the legalization or decriminalization of marijuana generally?
Well, I think it is hypocritical to criminalize marijuana and legalize alcohol and nicotine. I would advocate for the legalization of cannabis. That being said, I think that it has to be controlled and regulated pretty much in the same way that alcohol and tobacco are controlled and regulated now, because it is capable of being abused. Um, Age restrictions, perhaps quantity restrictions. Uh, Marijuana may be harmless to most of the population, but there are some people who, if they use it, it can trigger other things that are not good. So it has to be regulated. But in terms of the general legalization, I do not oppose that at all.
All right. So what is your position? A few months ago, we saw a bill being proposed by Bernie Sanders in Congress to import to import lower cost drugs from Canada, right? As a way to control for the fact that, the government does not negotiate with drug companies in America. What is your position on exporting lower drugs from, uh,
Importing.
more inexpensive drugs from Canada or just overseas in general? Or do support generally just having a more vigorous debate about the pharmaceutical company in America?
I don't see a rational reason for Americans having to pay more for drugs that they need to live. I don't think there's really a rational argument for it. The big farm companies say the prices are so high here because Americans bear the cost of the research and development of new drugs, even though the drugs go all over the world. So I think that the government should negotiate prices on new drugs, and I think if there's a way for Americans to buy their drugs cheaper from Canada or any place else, let them do it. Why not? I'd like to hear a rational argument against that.
Hmm. Okay, so right now they are discussing the ACA, right? They're discussing some of the failings of the ACA, and the question is being posed by someone who has a rare genetic disorder, and they require they require a chemo port to get fluids and nutrients, and they are currently suffering from the high cost of out-of-pocket expenses, and without the ACA, they will die. Right. So the question that's being posed to Nancy Pelosi is, what will she do to ensure lower out-of-pocket expenses with the same or better benefits? How would you save this person's life who requires, basically the rare genetic disorder, who requires constant care, constant flow of drugs? What's your solution to that person? I think that we broached it, earlier, obviously, but
Sure. I
reiterate.
can answer that in 2 words. I have 2 word answer: single payer.
Well, I mean, yeah, but that's much less. that's much less sexy than means testing and a lot more a lot of math. So I mean, I laid it up for you,
Well,
but
I'm not here to be sexy. I'm here to offer solutions. Offer solutions to people, to problems people have, and that's an obvious solution to the problem that you've just described. What is Pelosi saying about? What's her answer? Do we know?
we don't know yet, right? So,
Okay.
but I mean, at this point, it's like your answer seems, unless she's also supporting single payer, your answer would requires me to ask, well, how do you get single payer passed, right? So there seems to be resistance not only from Republicans but Democrats in getting single payer. uh how do you plan on sort of not only bridging that gap but bringing people over to your side? So let's say to support
I
John
think
Connor's
that
bill.
well, I think I said this earlier in our discussion. I'll say it again. I think people misunderstand what it is. I think if they were explained what it is, how it works, why it is cost effective, and the fact that every other civilized nation in the world with single payer healthcare systems are healthier and their people live longer. I would once again, I think most Democrats, if explained to them, they support it. And I certainly am ready to stand there and explain it to anybody who wants to listen.
Okay, so while we're waiting for Nancy Pelosi's answer on for this question, well, let's talk a little bit about, and in your opening, in your introduction, you mentioned.
Don't hold your breath for her answer.
I won't. I mean, I need my breath to speak, and also I have a feeling there's going to be something ACA. The will of the people aren't behind single payer. If it were up to me, we would have community health centers plastered all over the country, and I personally support it, but no one else does. Sorry, Charlie. But I can't put words in her mouth. We'll see when I get when she answers the question. Maybe she'll prove us wrong. Maybe she'll come out and support single payer tonight. Maybe you won't have to run. I mean, I'm just
Well,
saying.
I'm running.
Okay,
Uh,
so in your introduction, you mentioned super delegates, right? You mentioned the fact that you're in favor of reforming the way the Democratic Party conducts itself, as and for holds itself accountable to the people. Can you speak a little bit more about that, and also can you speak a little bit more about where your money's coming from? Are you in favor of campaign finance reform? Are you being supported by super PACs, et cetera, stuff like that?
all right. In terms of super delegates, I said, are undemocratic with a big D and a little d. To be true. If the Democratic Party delegates and even worse, manipulating the results in the back room, as their lawyer has recently argued, then why do we bother to hold primaries at all? Doesn't a voter who goes to vote in a Democratic primary have a right to a reasonable expectation that when they go and vote, their vote's going to be counted? What the Democratic Party is telling them in the last week or so is, no, you don't. You don't have that right. You can vote, but we reserve the right to go in the back room and change the results of the primaries. We reserve the right to essentially lie, cheat, steal, and give the nomination to anybody we want. And that's immoral, and it's wrong, and it's undemocratic. So that's my position on superdelegates.
So, the second part of my question: how about campaign finance reform? All right, where is your money coming specifically from? Small donors? Are you being supported by any PACs, any super PACs,
No, I
any
have not
money,
received.
dark money?
I have not received a nickel of PAC money at all. Um, my money has all come from individual donors. And most interestingly, even though I'm running for the 12th district in California, I've gotten donations. At least half or more of my donations are from outside California, all over the country. And think about what statement that's making. I'm a stranger to these people. And people from all over the country find out I'm running against Nancy Pelosi and send me money, for which I'm very grateful, I should add. All right. I have been a strong advocate here in San Francisco of dark money resolutions. I drafted and helped pass a dark money resolution, or an anti-dark money resolution for our Democratic Central Committee. I'm the president of a Democratic club which passed the resolution, an anti-dark money resolution. I believe dark money should be abolished from politics, and ultimately, if possible, money itself, private money, should be abolished from politics. That would require some kind of government funding of campaigns. That's a very complicated issue, but the first step is to abolish this dark money. I do not, I've not had any money from PACs, and I will not take money from any corporations.
Okay. So I just want to point out that Nancy Pelosi has begun to answer the question about, about healthcare reform in this, era of Trump. She initially started by saying that healthcare should be a right that all Americans have and not just the wealthy. But she has yet to point out any, she's yet to also come out vocally to support single payer, nor has anyone asked directly about single payer during the CNN town hall. I can read to you her response real quick. The criticism of the ACA, the ACA has problems. You didn't make the fixes. That animosity grew, and now, yes, the Republicans are in control. The Democrats have been content with the problems. Maybe taking some losses for what's in the ACA is in the interest of bettering for everyone. Is this a fair criticism? So that's something that someone said at this town hall, that there were problems built into the ACA that could have been hashed out in the beginning. So again, I feel we're going around in circles, right? And it's unnecessary because
Well, wait a minute. Where's her answer? She's talking about what's happened in the past. I want to hear from Ms. Pelosi. What's her answer to the problem that exists today, not what's happened in the past? She hasn't proposed anything.
Well,
where's her answer? How do you fix it?
Apparently, her criticism is more that they should be. Oh, I'm sorry. My mistake. That was a follow up. Her answer was more along the lines of fixing the ACA is, less important right now than defeating the AHCA, the American Health Care Act, and also just the general notion that Americans have the right to health care, not just the wealthy Americans, but all Americans. However, she has not come out and support single payer. I misread their response, but so basically, she has not come out in favor of single payer. She's still focused on fighting.
Let's follow that. She wants to defeat, I'm going to call it Trump care because the initials get me confused. She wants to defeat Trump care, and Obamacare is gone. They repealed it. They're trying to replace it with something called, let's suppose she succeeds, it somehow in the Senate or the House. All right? Then what? Then what does she propose? What's the replacement for the Americans? That's what she's not talking about. What is her proposal?
That's a fair point. I think right now she is, focused on defeating the AHCA. But I think that you've pointed out that the only way to defeat the AHCA, and correct me if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, is to be vocally supportive of Medicare for all. That the only way to defeat the AHCA and also to fix Obamacare is to actually be vocally in support of single payer. Is that correct?
Well, almost. The only way to defeat the AHCA is to offer a viable alternative. There's got to be an alternative. There's got to be another option. Otherwise, she's just completely negative. Defeat it, defeat it, defeat it, and then there's nothing left. Then we don't have either Obamacare or Trump care, and everything's empty. And then we have to start all over again. So she's got to offer an alternative. And I think the only rational alternative is, as you know, single payer. There's a law right now in California where I live, SB 562, to make the entire single payer, and it's already passed the committee, and it's being pushed very hard. It can be done. California is doing it.
Okay, allow me to provide clarification as to what Nancy Pelosi said in response to the healthcare question. She said that the AHCA is basically worse than the ACA and it's a step backwards from the progress that we've made so far, and that passing any other bill besides the ACA is made impossible by the obstructionist of the I'm sorry, in the GOP. So her position is that single payer might be too difficult to pass with the GOP in control of both houses and also the presidency. How do you respond to that?
That's why you have to elect me and other people like me in 2018 to change that. We have to take the Congress back, and we have to pass these laws. That's my short answer.
Okay. Well, so let's move on to criminal justice reform. Right now, they are talking about Attorney General Jeff Sessions rolling back of reforms and prosecuting enhancements on mandatory drug offenses. So we basically earlier we spoke about legalizing marijuana for both medicinal usage and also just recreational usage. So I don't know if you've been following what's been going on with Jeff Sessions, but what, if anything, do you plan on doing to prevent the Attorney General from rolling back the reforms and continuing with his increased prosecution of drug offenses? So the Attorney General, for clarification, Jeff Sessions is a drug warrior, for lack of a better word, and he is looking to roll back some Obama era regulations on mandatory drug offenses. So how do you think that this should be handled? How do you think that basically, how do you think that drug offenders, nonviolent drug offenders, should be? I'm sorry. How do you think that prosecution of nonviolent drug offenders should be handled in the future?
Well, I'll try not to give too much of a lawyer answer here. One of the statements I've heard about what Sessions proposed is that with his proposals, who needs judges? All you need is a calculator, and that's a pretty good answer. Mr. Sessions can tell the U.S. attorneys in the Justice Department to essentially overcharge all these drug cases, the nonviolent drug offenders. But that doesn't mean, one, the juries will convict them, and two, it doesn't mean the judges will sentence them. There's all kinds of ways that doesn't prevent plea deals being made. I think Mr. Sessions is himself kind of a walking disaster for the U.S. He was supposed to recuse himself from this whole Comey business, and he jumped right back in, and that, I believe, needs to be investigated. But it's not that easy to take an entire criminal justice system in the United States and the federal court system and just with an instruction change it that fast. There's many U.S. attorneys and AUSAs, assistant U.S. attorneys all over the country who have better sense than Mr. Sessions and understand that there's other ways to do it other than the way he has told them to do it.
Okay, so that's again, I apologize to all of our viewers for the jankiness of kind of this. Obviously, someone has to relay the questions that are being asked to Nancy Pelosi back to me, and I have to relay them to Mr. Jaffe as we do this. So I apologize if it comes across as a little bit clumsy at times. Speaking on Jeff Sessions, right? He, as the Attorney General, prior to this new rolling back of drug offenses, or rather, with this new rolling back of drug offenses, it seems to fit into this pattern that we've seen emerge where his position on racial justice, or basically the prosecution, because we do know, let's not mince words, that African Americans, people of color, are the most likely to be targeted and unfairly and disproportionately prosecuted for drug offenses in America, regardless of the fact that they are, again, just as nonviolent or use at similar rates. Similarly, a few months ago, Jeff Sessions rolled back some of the regulations and deals that were made between the Obama administration, Department of Justice, and local police enforcement local police departments, in places like Baltimore, Seattle, Cleveland, etc. What is your position on this, I will say, epidemic, for lack of a better word, of police brutality, this epidemic of unequal enforcement of certain laws? How do you envision America moving towards a more equitable racial justice paradigm?
Well, that's a subject for about 2 or 3 books of discussion. My main concern about the criminal justice system and the disproportionate enforcement against African Americans is that, to state the obvious, is that it's race based. It's race based, and that the actions of Mr. Sessions and the action of some police departments have been shown to be race based. And at the core of this is a cultural issue of racism, which must be eradicated in the United States. And the police attitudes are only symptomatic of a much deeper disease in the society, which is racism. And I think if we get at the core causes of that, um, the rest of society will tend to fix itself. But I don't pretend to have a very easy answer to that, Brandon. I just don't. It's a horrible situation. I know that African Americans, I don't know, 10 or 15% of the population, and over 50% of the people in prison. I know that's true. I think my numbers may be a little off, but not much off. And that's wrong. That is prima facie race-based enforcement of the law.
Okay, so we have another question coming in from Twitter. What is your position on Israel-Palestine? Do you support the BDS movement? Why or why not? Coming from Travis.
On Israel, I absolutely support Israel's right to exist and to defend itself. At the same time, I support the rights of Palestinians living in Israel and near Israel to the same peace and security that the Israelis demand for themselves. I'm not enough of an economist to understand the BDS impacts, but I do think that perhaps a two-state solution should be something that should be studied. The sticky point, of course, on that is the West Bank. And I have other issues with some things about Israel. Israel is partly a theocracy, which is exactly what we criticize Iran for being. And I'm opposed to that. I'm an extremely strong proponent of an absolute separation of religion and government, church and state. And Israel doesn't have that, and I want to see that more in Israel. But in terms of the Palestinians versus Israelis, I think each have an equal right and reasonable expectation to the peace and security of their people.
Okay, fair enough. The next question coming from, the next question being asked to Nancy Pelosi at the town hall is, one of those questions, for lack of a better word, lack of a better phrase. What lessons from presidential history would you convey to President Trump? Like what do former presidents have to teach President Trump about presidenting?
Well, I'm a great scholar of, I don't know if I'm a great scholar. I read stuff about Lincoln a lot. And one of the things that I've learned about Lincoln is that, and I guess, frankly, both of them surrounded themselves with people of differing opinions. And both Lincoln and Roosevelt would sit around and listen to on issues where people would argue with each other. And from that, they could extract what they thought was the best thing to do in their judgment. Mr. Trump is exactly the opposite. He only wants people around him who are yes men, who agree 100% with him. And to which I say, why does he bother at all? I would say he should take the lessons of Roosevelt and Lincoln and get people of differing opinions, smart people, and listen to them. Someone who's willing to look at him and say, Mr. Trump, you're wrong about this, and here's why. But for whatever his personality reasons are, he's unwilling to do that. But that would be my best advice to him. Well, so long as he's going to be there.
I'm sorry I had to ask you that question. I think it's just, fluff and, filler. That was the last question being asked at the town hall. So I just want to ask you a few more questions that we've gotten from chat and that we still have from Twitter.
I thought that was a good answer to that fluffy question, though.
No, it was a great answer. It's just, the question just wasn't substantive. It's just like, I mean, the answer you gave was fine. I enjoyed it. I was a
Yeah.
history. One of my many majors was history. You know, to rip the veil
Okay.
off of why I'm such a loser in real life. No. But
Right.
that was a great answer. So one of the questions from chat, someone asked, what is your position on the private prison industry?
Get rid of it.
So you think that people like companies should not be allowed to provide services for, I'm sorry, detention services for either, the federal government, specifically for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE.
I think
You're categorically against the industry.
yes, I'm categorically against it, and it has nothing to do with economics. It has to do, I think it is immoral for a company to make a profit against the misery of people locked up in prison. I find that immoral. I also find I also find it immoral for-profit health insurance companies seeing profits from the illness and sickness of other people.
Fair enough. Okay, so we have one more, well, basically one more topic. How would you support our veterans who are coming home from the many wars that we're engaged in? Like how do you feel about uh the statistics that we hear coming, the statistics that we hear often, that veterans are at high risk for suicide. They have high rates of depression, have trouble finding jobs, etc. Like how would you go about supporting not just the idea of our troops, when they're at war, giving the military industrial complex lots of money, but when they come home, how would you support our troops?
Well, I'm not an expert on this subject, but I've given it some thought. I think the hole in the system is uh, talking, providing services when these guys and women get out of the service, when they return. I think they ought to be given, whether it's 30-day or a 60-day, kind of a cool down period where they are paid and they go somewhere where they can relax, and they can, if they want, be assessed, see whether they're at risk, suicide, drug use, violence, any of the things that they have fallen into. And I think that needs to be funded by the federal government. I guess kind of call it a halfway place or step down or whatever euphemism you want to call it. But you don't just throw them back right into society when they're not prepared to do. And that's what we do now. So that's what I would propose. And if I were in Congress, I would try to write a law that requires that kind of step down process for them.
Well, we're going to start winding the evening down. So I just have two more questions to ask you, and then we're going to have a special guest ask you the final question, if you don't mind. So let's say another 10 minutes. We're going to go for another 10 minutes. You okay with that?
Oh, sure. I'm
Okay.
enjoying this.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm glad you're enjoying it. I think that we're getting a great response from people in chat. They like hearing about you. They like the fact that you have a, very direct way of answering questions. There's not a lot of quibbling or pettifogging over the meaning of certain words. So it's great. I have a question. So right now we have seen a lot of focus on the abuses of Syria, right? Syria is in the news every so often, the Assad regime. What we don't see as often, right, are the abuses being committed, the atrocities being committed by the Saudi Arabian government. And so far, as it comes to places like Yemen, places like, and other Middle Eastern countries. Where's your position on, what is your position on not only Saudi Arabia, but countries that are traditionally thought to be allies of the United States of America that act aggressively or commit human rights violations abroad? So are you in favor of us continuing military support for places like Saudi Arabia?
Well, the reason the U.S. looks the other way at the human rights violations in Saudi Arabia, there's two of them. One is the obvious one, it's money and oil. The other is another obvious one, which is military bases. Saudi Arabia provides a lot of oil to us, and we still think we need it, or sort of need it. And also, they provide, I believe, military bases that we can land jet fighters that need to fly around the Middle East and do whatever it is we need to do. I find looking the other way at these atrocities. Saudi Arabia chops off the hands of thieves, and I don't won't go into some of the other things, but I find it completely hypocritical of the United States their way, and I think we should hold Saudis accountable if they want a relationship with the United States. They ought to be held accountable for how they treat their own people, and I don't think money is a good enough reason, or air bases is a good enough reason to.
So my final question, I'm going to play devil's advocate just one last time. I hope you don't mind. It's one of my favorite movies. I love Keanu Reeves. It's he's one of my favorite actors. He's great in that movie. Great in John Wick too, if you haven't seen it. Anyway, so we're in a time of great turmoil, right? The Democratic Party has lost over 1,000 seats nationwide. Trump is the president of the United States of America. The Republicans control the House and the Senate, and the Supreme Court is also kind of looks to be skewed towards the conservative side of the coin, for lack of a better word. Why do you think this is the time to start trouble within the Democratic Party and run against, what some people would consider to be a Democratic Party stalwart, the House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi? Is it really the time to be primarying Nancy Pelosi? And what do you feel to the critics who would say that that's just going to make the party weaker? We need to unite. We need to unite behind the Democrats that we have in Congress right now and not be primarying them. We should be helping them fight the Republicans.
Well, first, I disagree with your characterization that I'm
Keanu Reeves?
trouble. No, I'm talking about within the Democrat, right? Okay. I think this is the right time because I think the election of Donald Trump has changed everything. I think the Democrat is for decades been held in the grip of what I call corporate Democrats, establishment people. Miss Pelosi has been super wealthy from the day she was born. She has no way whatsoever to relate to what an ordinary American has ever gone through in their life. She says, yes, I'm for you, but the life she lives or has ever lived. I think that the grip of these corporate Democrats, these neoliberals on the Democratic Party is beginning to slip. And I think if the Democratic Party is going to be saved, it needs to come from new blood, progressive people like me and other people like me around the country who get elected of the Democratic Party. I'm in trouble. I think I'm rescuing the Democratic Party. That's the way I view it.
I mean, I was just playing devil's advocate. I think that primarying Democrats is a great idea. It's a great way to push them to the left. And if they won't go to the left, it's a great way to replace them. I was just, espousing my love of Keanu Reeves movies.
Keanu Reeves, that's a hell of a movie. You're right.
It is, right? Let's not get off track. Let's not, get off track. We can talk about this after. So joining us now to ask our final question is a very special young man who you might remember from Nancy Pelosi's, I want to say her last town hall. Trevor Hill, say hello. Yeah, okay.
Hi, Trevor. How are you?
Oh, we can't hear you, Trevor. I mean, your microphone might be having a little bit of a problem. I can hear your lips moving. I mean, I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear you.
You talking to me or Trevor?
No, we can hear you, but Trevor's having a little trouble with his mic. You there, Trevor?
Maybe not.
Well, while Trevor figured that out, for you who do not remember Trevor, he was the young man who asked Nancy Pelosi how she would appeal to those millennials who feel as though capitalism had failed them and were leaning towards a more leftist view of the economy. So hopefully he can ask another similarly cogent question of our guest tonight, Stephen Jaffe. Are you there, Trevor?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Great.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so
Hi, Congressman. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm fine. I call you the hero of Balboa High. That's my nickname for you.
I like that one. I think I'll use that.
All
Um,
right.
so my question for you, future Congressman Jaffe, was asked Nancy Pelosi my question. She mentioned towards the end as sort of an afterthought, because at the heart of my question was basically how are you going to bring young people with more progressive views into the party? And what she said was that they have what sounded like volunteers that go around to colleges and listen to, I mean, this is basically what she described, that they go around to colleges and listen to the issues that young people have. And then they bring those issues back to the party and relay that information to them. Clearly, that has not been very effective because young people don't at all feel represented by the Democratic Party, from what I've experienced. So, what would you do to engage young voters in the Democratic Party to get them to bring them into the fold?
Well, at this point, I'm going to invoke memories from 2016. I am probably going to try to do the same thing that Bernie Sanders did to cause large groups to support him, and that is with good ideas and straight talk and answering questions and listening, because that's what fired up the young people for Bernie, and that's what I hope will fire up my constituents here for me. That's really it. Just doing committees and listening groups and things like that. That you're absolutely right. Young people want to hear fresh ideas, and like single payer, like abolition of super delegates and things like that, that they relate to and can identify with. So that's my best answer. I'm not going to construct any kind of fancy program for it. I'm just going to continue to be them and answer questions the way I do, and that's what I hope to do.
That's the kind of straight talk that works.
All right, that's my best answer.
Well,
Yeah, no, great answer.
do you have any follow-up, Trevor? Or would you?
No, I mean, I think he's absolutely right. You know, the thing that got me and my friends excited about Bernie and the left in general in the wake of the election was the promise of new ideas, the promise of changes that actually affect young people. You know, coming up on stage and talking for an hour about how bad Republicans are is great to get people riled up about hating Republicans, but it doesn't inspire anybody. You know, that's not a message for hope. And so I think the thing to do to get people to come into the party rather than just keep cheering for it is to provide a hopeful message. And I think that's exactly what future Congressman Jaffe is doing.
Well, thank you. That's very flattering, and I'm humbled by that. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us, Trevor. We're going to start winding the night down. Do you have any final thoughts, Mr. Jaffe?
No, I just hope that
Well, we can only hope. So I want to thank you specifically, both Trevor and Mr. Jaffe, for joining us tonight. I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in to our counter town hall. You know exactly where we are, unlike Nancy Pelosi, who is apparently in a bunker somewhere, from what I've heard. I'm in Brooklyn. I believe that you're in California District 12. Jaffe, is that right?
I'm right here in San Francisco. I'm around the block from AT&T Park.
Oh, excuse me. And I think that Trevor's also in New York somewhere.
That's the Empire State right behind me there.
Okay, so you all know where we are, right? That's the kind of local independent media charm that we have. Again, I want to thank all of our viewers. You know, you make us possible by supporting us through patreon.com/expand discourse. You know, Progressive Army, please like, share, and subscribe to our various channels and shows. Again, my name is Brandon Sutton. I have been your, you know, passable, mediocre, great, amazing, infallible, you know, stop wherever you'd like to host for tonight. And this has been a special Progressive Army presentation. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you, Brandon, for the opportunity.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Good night.
Thanks very much.